Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I'm going to tell this the way it happened. From the inside of the place, nobody pictures when they walk through a public building. Not a bunker, not a cabin, not a heroic last stand. A maintenance access that was never meant for a person to live in, tucked under a facility that stayed lit and loud right up until it didn't. My name is Jonah Mercer. I'm a building maintenance technician by trade, the kind of person you don't notice until a door won't latch, a restroom won't flush, or an alarm panel starts chirping at 2 a.m. For 7 years, I worked for a facilities contractor that handled a cluster of public properties in the downtown core of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, including the complex around the Pennsylvania Convention Center and the adjacent municipal buildings. I knew the back-of-house routes better than the public entrances. I knew which keys opened which cages. I knew the smell of hot dust on an electric heater and the different pitch a fan motor makes when a belt starts to glaze. On the morning everything tilted, I was already under the building. It was a Tuesday. Winter light, the kind that makes the city look clean even when it isn't. I'd come in early because one of the sump pumps in a service pit had tripped overnight, and the call log flagged it as a repeat issue. Repeat issues are the ones that turn into flooded corridors and angry emails if you ignore them. I parked in the loading bay, walked past stacked pallets and a row of gray rolling bins, and let myself into a stairwell that smelled like concrete and mop water. Downstairs, the building didn't feel like a convention center. It felt like a ship. Pipes, conduits, ductwork, and a constant background hum. The air was cooler, steady, controlled. It was a place built to hide its own organs. I checked the pump control panel first. The indicator light was still blinking. I didn't have to touch anything to see what had happened. The breaker handle on the nearby subpanel was sitting in that half-tripped position, neither on nor off, like it couldn't commit. I flipped it all the way off, waited, then back on. The pump kicked for 2 seconds and shut itself down again with a hard clunk that you could feel through the floor. I crouched and shined my light into the pit. The water level was higher than it should have been. There was debris floating in it, and something darker down at the intake screen. A rag, maybe, or the remains of one. If it was wrapped around the impeller, the pump would overload and protect itself. Simple problem. Annoying fix. I grabbed my gloves, the long-handled hook we used for pulling junk out of pits, and a canvas tool bag. The pit access was through a hatch with a recessed handle. I pulled it open and set the hatch cover aside carefully so it wouldn't clang. Sound carries in basements like that, and I'd learned the hard way that a clang at 6 a.m. brings security guards to investigate because nobody likes unexplained noises in public facilities. I climbed down, boots on steel rungs, and stepped onto the narrow concrete ledge beside the water. The pit was cramped enough that you had to turn sideways to work. Above me, a tangle of pipes and a low ceiling. The air smelled like damp concrete and a trace of detergent from the janitorial storage nearby. That's where my phone started vibrating like it couldn't stop. I didn't ignore it because it was work. It wasn't a text. It was an alert. Then another. Then my phone screen went to a full-page message that made my stomach tighten before I even read it all. Emergency alert. Stay indoors. Avoid crowds. Do not approach aggressive individuals. The wording was careful, almost bureaucratic, like someone was trying to describe something they couldn't put into plain language without causing panic. Above me, somewhere in the public levels, I heard a ripple of noise that didn't belong. It wasn't the normal morning sound of forklifts and rolling cases and vendors setting up. It was shouting, and it moved like a wave. The pit water sloshed slightly as if the building itself had tensed. I climbed up fast, stowing my hook without thinking about it. I shoved the hatch cover into place, not fully seated, just enough so it wouldn't trip anyone. My phone kept lighting up with more alerts and missed calls. My supervisor, my sister, a number I didn't recognize. I took the service corridor toward the mechanical room because that was instinct. Go to the place where you can see the building's status. The mechanical room had the building automation interface on a wall monitor, the alarm panels, the controls. It also had heavy doors and no windows. Halfway there, I passed a janitor's closet that had its door propped open. A cart was half pulled out. The person who'd been using it was gone, and the mop bucket water was still spinning faintly. That's when I realized the wave of shouting above wasn't just noise. It was fear. Then the first person came down the stairwell into the back corridor. He was running hard, unsteady, and he didn't slow down when he saw me. His eyes were wide and wet. There was something on his jacket, a smear like he'd fallen into something dirty, and he kept making a sound that was part gasp, part sob. Behind him, 2 more people burst through the door, and the second one slammed it shut and leaned into it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "What's happening?" I said, and I didn't like how small my voice sounded. The man who'd closed the door looked at me like I was asking what the weather was. "They're attacking people," he said, "upstairs. Just people, they're—" He stopped, shook his head as if the words didn't fit. The door behind him rattled once, hard, like someone had thrown a shoulder into it. Then again, the man flinched backward. The first guy, the one who'd run past me, rounded the corner and disappeared deeper into the service area. The other 2 looked like they wanted to follow him. The door rattled again, and I heard a sound that wasn't a normal shout. It was a raw, strained noise, like someone yelling with no air left, repeating itself. The man at the door backed away. "We have to go," he said, and grabbed the other person's sleeve. I should have gone with them. The normal part of my brain said, "Leave the basement, get outside, get distance, get to your car." But another part of my brain, the part that had spent years learning how buildings work, was already calculating. Crowds above, confusion, people moving without direction, doors that lock from one side, corridors with dead ends. And the thing I'd just heard on the other side of that door, it didn't sound like panic. It sounded like something simpler. Hunger, maybe, or anger without focus. The 2 people ran after the first, their footsteps fading. I stood in the corridor for a second, listening. The door rattled again, then went still. Silence is never a relief in a place like that. Silence means something has changed. I turned and walked quickly toward Mechanical 2, where the big air handlers and the chilled water pumps sat behind caged sections and warning signs. Past that mechanical room, behind a set of stacked access panels, there was a maintenance passage that almost nobody knew existed, unless they'd been tasked with checking it. It wasn't a tunnel you could stroll down. It was a narrow access used for routing cable, and occasionally getting to a stuck damper actuator without tearing out a wall. The kind of space that existed because engineers don't like dead ends for utilities. We called it the zipper, because the access doors were spaced like teeth along a wall, and if you opened the wrong one, you'd find yourself staring into a void barely wider than your shoulders. I'd been inside it exactly 3 times. Once, during a fire inspection when an inspector insisted we prove there wasn't an illegal storage area. Once, when a communications contractor lost a fish tape and we had to retrieve it. And once, when a pipe leak in a nearby chase had soaked the insulation and we had to inspect for mold and replace wet sections. It was not a place meant for a person to stay, but it was a place that was hard to find, hard to access, and easy to overlook when people were searching obvious rooms. I reached Mechanical 2 and found the door unlocked, which was already wrong. That door was supposed to be badge access only. I pulled it open and stepped into the room, and the familiar roar of fans and pumps hit me in the chest. The overhead lights were on. The equipment was running. The building still had power. I moved past the cages and ductwork, staying close to the wall. I didn't know what was happening upstairs, but I knew that if the building was still operational, security would eventually start sweeping. They'd check restrooms, offices, storage rooms. They'd call out. They might even use the public address system. In a normal emergency, you want to be found. In whatever this was, I didn't trust being found. In the far corner, behind a stack of replacement filters and a bundle of spare flex duct, was the access panel. It looked like a plain metal door, hinged, flush with the wall, painted the same dull beige. There were no handles, just two recessed latches that needed a flat tool to turn. I pulled my multi-bit screwdriver from my bag and turned the latches. The panel opened inward with a reluctant squeak. Behind it was a dark slit of space with a low ceiling and a faint smell of dust and metal. You could see the edges of cable trays and the rough concrete of the building's structural wall. The passage didn't have lights inside. It didn't have a floor you'd call a floor. It was a narrow maintenance access with a shallow trough for conduits and drains, and a strip of concrete where you could place your feet if you walked sideways. I hesitated for half a breath, then slid in. The panel closed behind me with a gentle push. I pulled it until the latch clicked. I didn't lock it fully because I didn't want to be trapped with no exit if something went wrong, but I wanted it to look closed from the outside. From the mechanical room, it would just look like a wall. Inside the zipper, everything changed. The roar of mechanical 2 became muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over it. The air was still close. The ceiling was low enough that I had to hunch. I turned my flashlight on and the beam caught dust motes, the edges of conduit straps, the braided shielding of communication lines. There was a cable tray above my shoulder, loaded with black and blue runs, neatly bundled, tagged at intervals. There was a small condensate line with a trap and a drain pipe that disappeared into the floor trench. This space was alive with infrastructure, but it was dead in terms of human comfort. No ventilation meant for a person. No egress designed for panic. It was an in-between place. My heart was hammering, and I kept telling myself, this is temporary, a place to wait, a place to let the first wave pass, then you go. But minutes stretched. The sounds outside shifted. The mechanical room's hum continued, steady, but beyond that, through layers of walls and ducts, I started hearing things I couldn't explain away. Footsteps running in bursts. A loud crash like a cart hitting a barrier. A sustained alarm tone that cut off and returned. A voice over the public address system that started confident and ended shaky. The message repeated, but the last words got swallowed by feedback and then the system went silent. I checked my phone. The signal was weak but present. Messages were stacked. My sister, Leah, "Are you at work? Please answer." My supervisor, "Stay where you are. Do not go outside. Lock in." A city alert. Emergency operations active. Avoid Center City. No message explained what it was. Nobody used the word everyone was thinking. They danced around it with phrases like aggressive individuals and unpredictable behavior. I texted Leah, "I'm in the building. Safe right now. We'll update." It took 5 minutes for the message to go through. I didn't have a chair. I didn't have a place to sit. I crouched on the concrete strip and tried to slow my breathing. The air felt thin, but I told myself it was stress. Confined spaces mess with you even when you think you're fine. We had training about that. Confined space entry, oxygen deficiency risks, carbon dioxide buildup, the importance of monitors. This wasn't a permit-required confined space by definition, but it wasn't meant to be occupied. I turned my flashlight off to conserve battery, and because the light made me feel visible even though nobody could see it. In darkness, I listened. 2 hours passed, maybe 3. Time got slippery. At some point, the building's hum changed. Not stopped, but shifted. The fans ramped down slightly, then up, like the building automation system was responding to a pressure change. That meant doors were opening somewhere, or dampers were closing, or smoke control had activated. I pictured the building trying to protect itself without understanding what the threat was. My phone battery dropped faster than I liked. I put it in low power mode. I checked the time anyway, just after noon. The first time I heard a deliberate search was the moment I knew I couldn't simply wait out a few hours and walk out like this was a storm. It started with footsteps that weren't running. They were spaced, careful. A voice called out, muffled through the wall. "Maintenance. Anyone down here, call out." Another voice answered. "We clear storage first, then mechanical, then back corridors." They were organized. Security, maybe, or police, or a mix of whoever had radios and authority. The fact that they were searching meant they expected survivors in the building. In a normal emergency, I would have called out. I would have told them where I was and followed instructions. But I'd already heard what was on the other side of that stairwell door earlier, and I didn't trust that search team meant safe. Because if they were searching for people, something else was searching too. I stayed silent. The voices moved closer. I could tell when they entered Mechanical 2 because the muffled roar became briefly sharper, then settled. Flashlight beams swept across cracks at the edge of the access panel. Thin slivers of light that made my stomach clench. Someone moved a stack of filters. Something scraped. "Door here," a voice said. "What's that?" My hands went cold. The access panel was behind those filters. If they pulled them away, they'd see it. Another voice. "That's a chase access, not a room. Check it." A pause. I could imagine a hand on the latch. Then, mercifully, another sound pulled them away. A distant bang, heavy, followed by yelling. Not the organized kind, the kind that makes people move. "Forget it," someone snapped. "We got movement by the service stair. Go!" Their footsteps retreated fast, and the mechanical room door slammed hard enough to vibrate the wall. I stayed crouched in the dark, every muscle locked, listening to the building swallow them. That was the first close call. It wasn't the last. By the end of the first day, I had accepted a terrible truth. I was alive because I was hidden, and I was hidden because the space was awful. Low ceiling, limited air movement, no comfortable posture, nothing to do but listen to the building and try not to make noise. The same features that made it a nightmare to work in were now the features that kept me from being noticed. When night came, the building didn't go fully dark, at least not right away. Emergency lighting in corridors, exit signs, the low glow from equipment indicators. But outside of my slit of space, the human layer of the building thinned. The footsteps became rarer. The voices vanished. The alarms stopped. A silence settled that felt heavier than any noise. I slept in fragments. 10 minutes, then a jolt awake, 20 minutes, then the feeling that the air was too warm. I shifted positions constantly because the concrete cut into my hips and knees. My neck cramped. My shoulders ached from hunching. Around 2 a.m, I heard movement again. Slow, dragging, irregular. It didn't belong to a team. It belonged to one body moving with no purpose other than forward motion. It passed along the corridor outside Mechanical 2. It paused. I heard a faint tapping, like fingers on metal. Then a soft thud, like a forehead against a door. I held my breath until my ears rang. The tapping moved away. In the morning, my mouth felt like sand. I realized I hadn't brought water. My tool bag had a small bottle, half full, forgotten from the day before. I drank it slowly, hating myself for not thinking. My brain had been in problem-solving mode, but the problem had changed from fix the pump to stay alive, and I'd reacted on instinct without planning. The zipper wasn't stocked, it wasn't a shelter, it was just a gap. I had to decide whether to leave it to gather supplies, and leaving meant exposing myself to whatever had taken over the building. I stayed until I couldn't. By late morning of the second day, my phone signal became unreliable. Messages stalled. I got one from Leah that came through in a clump with earlier ones. I'm at Aunt Maria's in the northeast. Don't come downtown. Something is wrong. People are attacking. Stay hidden. I typed back, where exactly? The message sat unsent, spinning. I needed water, I needed food, I needed information, and I needed a plan that wasn't crouch in a maintenance access until I pass out. The advantage I had was knowledge. I knew this facility like a map. I knew which corridors connected. I knew where the domestic water lines ran and where there were hose bibs meant for cleaning crews. I knew where vending machines were tucked in staff areas. I knew where the security office was, where radios might be. I knew where there were fire doors that could be used as barriers. I also knew the building had cameras, and that if the security system was still powered, someone might be watching screens somewhere. I could be good or bad depending on who was behind the screens. I waited for a quiet stretch. Then I opened the access panel just enough to look out. Mechanical 2 was empty. The lights were on. The hum was steady. A stack of filters had been shifted from its neat position. Evidence of the search team, otherwise nothing moved. I stepped out carefully, closing the panel behind me, and listened. The rest of the basement corridor was quiet too. No voices, no running, no dragging footsteps. I moved like I was back on a night shift, trying not to wake anyone. I kept my flashlight off and relied on the glow of indicator lights and the dim spill from hallway fixtures. My boots were loud on the concrete, so I shifted my weight to the edges of my soles. It wasn't silent, but it was less sharp. First stop was a janitorial closet I knew had bottled water sometimes, because crews kept extra cases there for long events. The closet door was unlocked. Inside, the shelves were half stripped. Someone had been there already. But behind a stack of paper towel boxes, I found 2 bottles rolling loose and a sleeve of snack crackers. I didn't celebrate. I just pocketed them like they were parts for a repair. Next stop was a staff break nook near an internal corridor, where a vending machine sat between a bulletin board and a sink. The lights in that corridor were out, but the emergency fixtures glowed along the floor. The air felt colder here, and the silence was deeper. A bad sign. Silence in a public building usually means it's empty. Empty is good until it isn't. The vending machine display was dark, no power. I tried the coin return out of reflex. Nothing. I didn't shake it or hit it, sound was risk. I checked the nearby sink, no water flowed. That meant the building's domestic water was off, or pressure was lost. I stood there, holding 2 water bottles like they were gold, and felt my options narrow. If domestic water was out, then the sprinkler system might still be charged, but that wasn't drinkable. The chilled water and heating water loops weren't drinkable either. The building had a small emergency eye wash station in one mechanical area that fed from a dedicated bottle reservoir. That was sterile water. It was meant for eyes, but water is water when you're desperate. I headed back toward Mechanical 1, which was closer to the loading bay and had more utility connections. The corridor on the way there passed a service stairwell door that led up to the event floors. The door was ajar. It hadn't been earlier. A cold rush went through me. I backed away slowly and listened. From up the stairwell came a faint sound, like a group shifting. Not words, not organized, but bodies present. Breath and movement. The kind of noise you hear in a crowded hallway when people are waiting for an elevator, except there was no conversation layered on top. Just the physical presence. I didn't look up. I eased away and took an alternate route, one that looped behind the storage rooms and came out near Mechanical 1 from the other side. That route was longer, but it didn't put me under a stairwell full of unknowns. Mechanical 1's door was locked. I used my badge. The reader light blinked red. The access system was down or disabled. I tried my mechanical key. It turned. Inside, the room felt different than Mechanical 2. More pumps, more pipes, and a small electrical closet with panels that fed parts of the facility. The air was warm from equipment heat. The lights were on, but dimmer, like they were on a reduced circuit. That made my stomach twist too, because it meant power was unstable. Maybe running on backup, maybe parts of the building were islanded. I found the eye wash station on the wall near the chemical feed room. The bottles were still there, sealed. I took one, then the other, and tucked them into my bag. I also grabbed a roll of heavy contractor trash bags from a shelf. In a place like the Zipper, waste becomes a crisis faster than hunger. If you can't keep it contained, you can't stay. As I turned to leave, I heard something that stopped me cold. A faint radio squawk. It came from the security console in the corner. A small desk with monitors and a charging cradle, usually used by roving guards to check cameras and log rounds. One of the handheld radios was still there, sitting in the cradle, its small screen glowing faintly. The building still had some power. The radio was on. I stepped closer and listened. The squawk repeated, then a voice came through, clipped and tired. Unit 4, status check. Unit 4, respond. No answer. Then another voice, closer to the mic and more strained. If anyone is in the lower levels, do not come up to street. Repeat, do not come up to street. We have... The voice broke into static, then returned. We have uncontrolled activity outside. Stay internal if you can. I didn't like the way they talked around it. It meant they didn't have a name for it either, or they didn't want to give it a name because names make panic real. I picked up the radio and held it for a second. It felt heavy with responsibility. In normal times, you don't transmit unless you have a reason. In abnormal times, silence can get you forgotten. I pressed the transmit button. This is maintenance, I said quietly. Name Jonah. I'm in lower mechanical. Static, then. Maintenance, copy. Where exactly? I hesitated. Saying Mechanical 1 was too precise if the wrong person heard, but I needed something. Near the West Service Bay, I said. Lower level, I'm alone. A pause, then, Jonah, do not move to public levels. If you have a secure space, stay there. We're trying to regroup personnel. We can't sweep everything right now. Who is this? I asked. Officer Dorsey, the voice said. Security. I knew the name. Dorsey was a day shift supervisor, a guy with a calm voice and a habit of double-checking doors. If he was still on the air, that meant at least one part of the facility's security team was functioning. Domestic water is out, I said. Power's partial. Copy. We lost city pressure early morning. Backup generators are running some systems, but not all. We're locked down in the command office. Cameras are limited. What's happening outside? I asked, and hated how my voice shook. A long pause. Then, people are not themselves. If you see anyone acting erratic, do not approach. That was all he'd say. Maybe because he didn't want to say more, maybe because he didn't have more. Listen, Dorsey said. What do you have for shelter? I thought of the Zipper, the narrow passage, the access panel hidden behind filters, the place no one wanted to crawl into. A maintenance access, I said, not a room. Can you secure it? I can make it look like a wall. Do that, Dorsey said. And keep this radio on low. If we get a safe corridor, we'll advise. Copy, I said. I clipped the radio to my belt and left Mechanical 1. Moving faster now because being out in open corridors felt like standing in the middle of a road at night. When I got back to Mechanical 2, I paused at the access panel and listened. The room was empty, the hum steady. I opened the panel and slid back into the Zipper like a drawer closing. Inside, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I drank from one of the water bottles in slow sips. I ate a few crackers. I put the contractor bags in the corner where the floor trench widened slightly. I didn't like what I was becoming. someone inventorying trash bags as if they were life support. But that's what it was. The zipper changed from a hiding place to a base. I learned the space by touch. I found a spot where the ceiling was a few inches higher, enough that I could sit with my back against the concrete without my neck cranking forward. I found a section where the cable trays created a shallow shelf where I could rest items without them sitting on the floor trench. I found a gap where a small amount of air moved, likely from leakage around a damper somewhere, and I stayed near it when I slept because it felt like breathing was easier there. I kept my radio volume low. I didn't transmit unless necessary. Sound was a currency I couldn't overspend. That night, there was another search. This one was not organized. It started with a door banging open somewhere in the basement, then footsteps running, then stopping, then a series of impacts, metal on metal, like someone yanking at locked doors, shaking them. A voice screamed something incoherent and then cut off abruptly. Not silence, but a different sound replaced it. A heavy scuffing, like shoes dragging. The zipper muffled it, but not enough to make it distant. I pressed myself against the wall and held the contractor bag roll like it was a weapon, which was ridiculous, but fear doesn't ask permission to be logical. The scuffing came closer to mechanical too. I heard the mechanical room door rattle, then a hard thud against it, again, then a new sound. The high-pitched chirp of an alarm panel, unhappy with a forced door. The door held. The thuds continued for a long minute, then stopped. Silence. Then the slow scuffing moved away. I stayed still long after it was gone because in a place like that you don't trust absence until it's proven. On the third day, the psychological part became as dangerous as the physical part. Your mind starts doing math you can't finish. How long can you stay in a narrow access with limited water? How long before the air becomes a problem? How long before someone opens the right panel and finds you, not because they're searching, but because they're fixing something? I did what I always did when I couldn't control the big picture. I broke the problem into smaller, solvable parts. Air, the zipper wasn't sealed, but it wasn't ventilated for people. I needed to avoid adding unnecessary carbon dioxide. That meant no exertion, no panic breathing. It meant sleeping more, moving less. I kept my breaths slow and shallow when I could. I also watched for headaches and dizziness. If those started, I'd have to relocate. Water. I had 4 bottles now. 2 from the closet, 2 from the eye wash station, plus a sleeve of crackers and whatever else I could find on future trips. I rationed without being extreme. Dehydration makes you stupid faster than hunger does. Waste. Contractor bags. A container. Keep it sealed. Keep odors down. Odors attract attention, and they also mess with your head in a closed space. Light. My flashlight battery was precious. My phone was precious. I used them like I used spare parts at work, only when necessary. Noise. The zipper was quiet enough that any sound I made felt huge. I wrapped my tool bag buckle in a strip of cloth so it wouldn't clink. I moved slowly so my boots wouldn't scrape. Then I started hearing something new. Routine. Around midday, I heard a pattern of footsteps in the basement that repeated. Not frantic, not dragging. A person moving with purpose, checking doors, pausing, moving on. That happened twice, 3 times. It might have been security, it might have been someone else, but it suggested at least one human was still operating with a plan. I listened for the radio. Dorsey's voice came through once. Any units, report? I pressed transmit. Dorsey, this is Jonah. A crackle, then immediate relief in his tone. Jonah, copy, status. Still in lower mechanical access, I said. I've made 2 supply runs, no contact. Good, he said. Listen carefully. We have a small group. 5. We're in the command office by the north corridor. We have limited camera coverage. The public levels are not secure. Lower levels are mixed. If you move only when quiet. What about getting out? I asked. A pause. Streets are not controlled, he said. We tried a vehicle exit, not possible right now. My throat tightened. So, we stay. For now, Dorsey said. If you can hold your position, hold it. I didn't like the word hold. It made me feel like a line in a plan rather than a person. That afternoon I heard voices again near Mechanical 2. Not security, 2 people arguing, low and urgent, then a third voice calming them down. Survivors. They were in the basement. My first instinct was to press transmit and call Dorsey, but I stopped. If I transmitted while strangers were nearby, they might hear my voice through the wall. They might start pulling panels in panic, thinking someone was hiding supplies. Or worse, they might not be human in the way Dorsey meant. The radio etiquette of the old world didn't apply anymore, but caution still did. The voices moved away. I stayed silent. On day 4, the building did something I didn't expect. It tried to reset itself. Around early morning, the emergency lights flickered and then stabilized. The hum of Mechanical 2 shifted again. Fans ramped, dampers moved. Somewhere, a motorized valve whined. It was the sound of an automated system going through a programmed sequence, like after a power transition. Then, without warning, a fire alarm strobe started flashing in the corridor outside Mechanical 2, its light pulsing through the crack of the access panel. No siren, just light. That meant the alarm system had partial activation or a fault. The flashing light was a problem. It could attract attention. It also meant something had triggered a zone, smoke, heat, or a damaged device. I considered leaving the zipper to investigate. Then I heard it. The dragging scuff of feet, drawn toward the light like a moth. It came down the corridor slowly. It stopped near the mechanical room door. There was a wet, raspy breathing sound that made my skin crawl because it was too steady, too absent of thought. The mechanical room door creaked as something leaned against it. Then it slid, scraping. A hand maybe tried the handle. The door was locked, thankfully. Another scrape, then a soft thump, repeated, like a forehead tapping. I sat in the dark, watching the strobe light pulse, and I understood a new kind of danger. The building's systems, meant to protect the public, could now act like lures. Emergency lights, alarms, open doors, anything that created stimulus could draw the wrong attention. The tapping continued for a long time. Then it stopped. The dragging sound moved away, slow, reluctant, as if it had lost interest. After it was gone, I forced myself to move. I couldn't stay in a place where a strobe light might keep pulling trouble to my door. I slid out of the zipper and entered Mechanical 2, closing the panel behind me. The strobe in the corridor was still flashing. I moved to the door and opened it a crack to look out. The corridor was empty, but the air smelled faintly like burnt dust. Electrical, maybe, or a device overheating. The strobe was attached to a wall-mounted alarm unit. The small indicator on it blinked. I didn't have the tools or authority to fully disable the fire system, and disabling it could have consequences if a real fire started. But I also couldn't have a beacon flashing non-stop. I did the only thing I could think of that didn't involve ripping wires out. I took a roll of tape from my bag, gaffer tape, the kind we used to temporarily secure cable, and covered the strobe lens, thick layers. It didn't stop the flash entirely, but it reduced it to a dull glow that wouldn't carry as far. I backed into Mechanical 2 and closed the door. Then I heard footsteps. Not dragging, fast, light, multiple. People running. I froze. The footsteps approached, then stopped outside Mechanical 2, voices hushed but urgent. Doors locked, someone whispered. Try the badge, another said. A beep, then nothing, another beep. Access is dead, the first whispered. We can force it. Don't, a third voice hissed. If we force doors, we draw them. There was a pause. Then the first voice, closer to the door. "Hello? If someone's in there, we're staff. We're not." He stopped, as if he didn't know what words to use. "We're safe. We're trying to find water." My heart slammed. Staff, water, real people. They didn't sound like security. They sounded like exhausted workers. I should have opened the door. I should have helped them. That's what the person I used to be would have done. But opening that door meant exposing the zipper, my only advantage. It meant letting unknowns into my space. The voices waited. Then one of them said, "We can't stay. Let's go." Footsteps retreated, running again, and faded. I stood there in Mechanical 2, shaking, and hated myself. But I also knew that if I'd opened the door and it went wrong, I'd be done. The zipper was not a room you could share with strangers. It was barely survivable alone. That night, Dorsey came on the radio again, his voice harsher. All units. We have movement in lower corridors. Do not engage. Stay behind secured doors." I pressed transmit. "Dorsey, I heard staff voices near Mechanical 2 earlier," I said quietly. "They moved on. 3 people at least." Static. Then, "Copy. If they're unarmed and coherent, we may try to link up, but we can't move now. We have 2 injured." "Injured how?" I asked before I could stop myself. A pause. "Falls," Dorsey said, and his tone made it clear he didn't want to say more. "We're low on supplies." That's when the equation changed again. It wasn't just me in a wall gap anymore. There were others, trapped in other pockets, running out of the same things. The 5th day was the worst. Not because something attacked my door or a search team found the panel. It was worst because nothing happened, and my brain filled the emptiness with fear. When you're alone in a narrow space, your senses turn inward. Every itch becomes a concern. Every swallow feels loud. The lack of sunlight makes your body forget time. Your muscles ache from being folded. Your thoughts replay every decision and accuse you from every angle. I started talking to myself in whispers just to prove I could still form sentences. I recited maintenance checklists like prayers. Inspect, verify, isolate, secure. I listed the names of people I knew in the building. Dorsey, Leanne from events, Omar the dock supervisor, the older electrician everyone called Doc, even though he wasn't a doctor. I imagined them in their own hiding spots, listening to the same hum of machines, making the same choices. That afternoon I heard a new sound, a metal scraping near the access panel. Someone was in Mechanical 2, moving filters, pulling things aside. I felt my stomach drop. The access panel shifted slightly as something bumped it from the outside. A voice muttered close, "There's a door here." Another voice, "Open it." I pressed myself deeper into the zipper, moving as quietly as I could, inching away from the panel toward the next tooth in the access run. The zipper wasn't just one segment. It ran along the wall with occasional internal breaks where structural supports narrowed it. If someone opened the first panel, they might only see a few feet of dark gap and decide it wasn't worth it, or they might crawl in. The latch turned. The panel creaked open. Light spilled into the zipper, harsh after days of dimness. A flashlight beam swept across conduits, cable trays, dust. "Nothing," someone said. The beam moved again, catching the edge of my tool bag shelf where I'd stacked water bottles earlier. I'd moved them away, but the shelf still had a piece of cloth and a wrapper corner. The beam paused. "Wait," the voice said. "Someone's been here." My heart hammered so hard I thought the cable trays would rattle from vibration. I clamped my jaw shut and forced myself not to breathe loudly. Another voice, closer, rougher. "Get in there, check it." A body shifted. The panel opening widened as someone leaned in. I saw the outline of a shoulder. The flashlight beam angled down the zipper farther than before. I backed away 1 inch at a time, careful not to scrape. The floor trench had small gravel and metal shavings. One crunch would give me away. The beam advanced. Then a new sound erupted behind them. A door slamming somewhere in the corridor, followed by a heavy thud and a snarl-like noise that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The voices outside changed instantly from predatory curiosity to fear. "Close it," someone hissed. The panel slammed shut. The latches rattled. Footsteps pounded away. I stayed frozen in the dark long after they were gone, listening to the corridor fill with chaos. Running, impacts, and that dragging scuff again, drawn by noise. That was the moment I realized something else. Not everyone searching was searching to help. Some were searching to take. Desperation turns people into risks. The outbreak hadn't just created one kind of threat. After that, I moved my supplies deeper into the zipper, beyond the first segment, past a structural narrowing where a larger person would have to squeeze. I made my hiding place smaller and harder to reach. It cost me comfort, but comfort had become a luxury I couldn't afford. On day 6, the building's power finally faltered. It started as a flicker. Then the hum of Mechanical 2 dipped, recovered, dipped again. The fans sounded strained, like they were trying to maintain pressure with less power. Then, with a shudder, the main lights went out. Emergency lights remained for a moment, then some of those died too. The building fell into a patchwork. A few exit signs glowing, a few indicator LEDs on panels, and then pockets of complete darkness. The mechanical room became quieter. Not silent, but quieter. That meant some equipment had shut down. If the air handler feeding that zone shut down, the zipper would become even more stale. I turned my flashlight on briefly and checked my phone. Battery low. Radio still had power, but weak. Dorsey came through once, strained and broken by static. Backup is failing. If you can move to a more ventilated location, do it carefully. More ventilated meant public corridors, bigger spaces, places with air movement. It also meant places more likely to be occupied by the wrong kind of presence. I sat in the zipper and felt the air around me warm slightly, like a sealed car in sunlight. A headache began behind my eyes. It might have been stress, it might have been oxygen. Either way, it was a warning. I couldn't stay forever. I waited until I heard the corridor outside settle. Then I slid out of the zipper and stepped into Mechanical 2. In the dim emergency glow, the room looked different, less industrial, more like a cavern of shadowed shapes. The pumps were quieter. One of the fan motors had stopped completely. The air felt heavier. I needed a new plan that didn't rely on a narrow access with failing ventilation. And I needed to find Dorsey's group because 5 people in one secure room had a better chance than 1 person in a wall gap. The problem was getting there. The command office was near the north corridor, which meant crossing the basement service spine and passing at least 2 stairwell intersections. Those intersections were where I'd heard dragging and tapping before, where uncontrolled movement tended to funnel. I didn't have a weapon that made me feel brave. I had a wrench, a screwdriver, and the kind of fire extinguisher you'd see on a wall. Tools, not a solution. And I wasn't interested in a fight. I was interested in avoiding one. I moved, using what I knew. Routes that didn't make sense to outsiders. I went through a storage room that connected to a utility corridor behind the main service spine. I used a mechanical room bypass that required stepping over a low pipe run. I stayed in the shadowed side of corridors and paused at every door to listen before opening. The building was darker now, and darkness can be protective if you know where you're going. Halfway to the north corridor, I heard whispers again, human whispers, coming from behind a closed door. I paused, hand on the handle, and listened. A woman's voice. "We can't go back. There's nothing." A man's voice. "We have to try another floor. There has to be a break room." A third voice, trembling. I'm tired. Those were the staff voices from earlier or another group like them. My instinct was to move on, not get involved. But the building was failing. Groups were forming. If I didn't connect with someone, I'd end up alone again in a building going dark. I pressed the transmit button on my radio, barely audible. Dorsey, I whispered. I'm moving North Corridor now. I'm near the utility bypass behind Storage C. Static. Then, faint. Copy. Keep moving. Stay off main spine. He was alive. That made my chest loosen slightly. I opened the door to the room with the whispering. 3 people snapped their heads toward me. Their faces were drawn, dusty, eyes too wide, a woman in a city-issued police jacket, a man with a lanyard and a vendor badge, another man sitting on the floor with his back against a cabinet, pale. The woman raised a metal pole, part of a mop handle, broken. Her hands shook. Don't, I said quickly, holding my free hand up. I'm maintenance, Jonah. I'm not here to take anything. The vendor badge man stared at my radio like it was a miracle. You have comms? Some, I said. There's security locked down in a command office. They're trying to regroup. Power is failing. The pale man on the floor swallowed. We heard things, he said. His voice was hoarse. Down the stairwell. I know, I said. What are your names? The woman hesitated, then lowered the pole slightly. Tanya, she said. Event staff. Rick, the vendor badge man said, and it sounded like he was forcing himself to stay calm. Trade show setup. The man on the floor took a breath. Miles, he said. Custodial. Miles looked like he might pass out from exhaustion. His lips were dry. Tanya's eyes kept flicking toward the door. We have to move, I said. Security has a room. It's more secure than this. Rick stood immediately. Tanya helped Miles up. He leaned on her, and I saw why Dorsey had said falls with that tone. Miles's ankle was wrapped in a strip of cloth, swollen badly. How do we get there? Tanya asked. Quietly, I said, and then realized how unhelpful that sounded. There's a back corridor road, fewer intersections. We moved as a unit, slow enough for Miles, fast enough to not linger. I led them through the bypasses, stopping at each door to listen. The building's darkness helped. It also made every small noise feel louder. At one intersection, we heard it. Dragging feet, close. We froze behind a partially open door, peering through the crack. In the corridor beyond, a figure moved under a dim exit sign. The person's head hung forward. Their gait was wrong, unbalanced, shuffling, as if the legs weren't being directed by a thinking mind. The figure paused and pressed hands against the wall, then moved again, drawn by some faint stimulus we couldn't hear. Miles gripped Tanya's sleeve so hard his knuckles turned white. Rick's breathing got loud. I pressed a finger to my lips and stared at him until he forced himself to slow. We waited until the figure drifted out of view. Then we moved. The command office door was reinforced, not like a vault, but heavier than a standard interior door. There was a small wired glass window at eye level that someone had covered from inside with a folded banner. A voice challenged us through the door. Who is it? Maintenance, I said. Jonah, I have 3 with me. The banner shifted. A pair of eyes appeared. Then the door unlocked with a metallic click and opened just enough to pull us in quickly. Inside were 5 people, including Dorsey. He looked different than the last time I'd seen him on a normal day. His uniform shirt was dirty, his hair flattened, his calm face tightened at the edges, but his eyes were clear. He was still himself. You made it, he said, and then looked past me at Tanya, Rick, and Miles. More survivors, good. The room wasn't large. It was an office with monitors, a desk, a wall map of the facility, and a cabinet of emergency supplies that had been raided. There were 2 other security officers, a woman from administration, and a man who introduced himself as Omar from the loading dock. Omar's face lit when he saw me, and in that moment I realized how much comfort simple recognition can bring in chaos. "We're losing power," Dorsey said. "Generators are unstable. We have some battery backup for cameras, but it's fading." "What's the street situation?" Rick asked. Dorsey's jaw tightened. "Not viable," he said. "Too much uncontrolled activity, too many incidents." He still wouldn't name it, but we didn't need the word. We had the evidence in our ears and the shadows we'd seen in corridors. We spent the next hours doing what humans do when the world narrows. We organized. We inventoried what we had. Water first. Food second. Light sources, batteries, blankets, basic medical supplies. We didn't have enough of anything, but we had more together than alone. I told them about the zipper, my hiding place, and how it had kept me alive. Dorsey listened carefully. "That's why they didn't find you," he said. "Nobody searches a chase unless they're trained or desperate." "Desperate people did," I said. "They almost opened it." Dorsey nodded grimly. "We've had looters," he said. "Not many, but enough. We made a plan with the building's layout like it was a board game. We identified the safest internal route to the loading bay, where we might access vehicles or at least the outside perimeter. We identified secondary corridors. We marked known problem stairwells. We discussed noise discipline like it was a law. Miles's ankle needed attention. The administration woman, Carla, had basic first aid knowledge and rewrapped it properly with a brace made from a splint kit. It wasn't perfect, but it stabilized him. That night, we heard impacts on the building above us, heavy, repeated, like crowds against doors. The public levels were not empty. They were being used by something we didn't want to meet. We stayed in the command office, lights off except for one dim lantern. We took turns sleeping in shifts. I couldn't fully sleep. My body was still tuned to the zipper's constant vigilance. But being in a room with others changed the mental pressure. When you're alone, every sound is your responsibility. With others, the burden divides, and that division is its own kind of relief. On day 7, the building went quiet in a way that felt different. Not just fewer footsteps, not just fewer alarms. A deeper quiet, like the facility had exhaled its last breath. The hum of equipment was gone. The exit signs were dark. The monitors were off. The only light came from our lantern and a few flashlights. We were on our own power now, and that meant time was running differently. Batteries don't last long in fear. Dorsey made the call. "We move today. We can't stay in a dead building. Once it's dark and cold, we'll be forced out anyway." "Move where?" Tanya asked. Dorsey looked at me. "Jonah knows the loading routes," he said. "We go to the bay, we try for a vehicle. If not, we go on foot through service alleys to the riverfront, away from crowds." He didn't say home. Nobody said home. Home was a word from the old world. We prepared like it was a job, quietly, methodically. We packed supplies into bags. We distributed flashlights so no one was left blind. We agreed on hand signals. We agreed that no one ran unless we had to, because running creates noise, and panic spreads faster than any threat. Before we left, I took a moment by the door and listened. The corridor outside was silent. Silence can be a trap. We opened the door carefully and stepped out as a group, Dorsey leading. Me close behind because I knew the route. Omar and the other security officers brought up the rear. Tanya helped Miles. Rick carried a bag of water. Carla held the lantern low, shielded. We moved through the basement corridors like ghosts, stepping around debris, avoiding doors that stood open. Every intersection was a pause, a listen, a scan. At the first stairwell crossing, we heard it again. A dragging scuff, faint but present. We stopped. Dorsey signaled to hold. I leaned slightly to see around the corner. In the darkness, a shape shifted. It wasn't sprinting. It wasn't hunting like an animal. It was moving as if drawn by the idea of movement itself. It drifted near the bottom of the stairwell, hands brushing walls, head tilted. When it turned, its eyes caught a faint reflection from our lantern, and it paused. The pause was the danger. Because pauses become focus. Dorsey signaled to back up. We moved as one, retreating silently into a side corridor, closing a fire door behind us with a controlled motion so it didn't slam. The door latched with a quiet click. On the other side, we heard a soft thud against the door, then another. Then a slow scrape, like fingers searching for a handle. We held our breath. The thuds continued for a minute, then stopped. The scraping faded. We waited longer than felt necessary, then longer, because the cost of being wrong was too high. When we moved again, we took an alternate path that I'd only used twice in my career. A narrow service corridor behind a bank of electrical closets that connected to the loading bay through a maintenance vestibule. It was cramped and dusty and lined with conduits, but it had one advantage. It didn't intersect any public access points. We reached the loading bay door and paused. The bay itself was a big open rectangle with concrete walls, high ceiling, and the smell of diesel that never fully leaves. In normal times, it was busy with trucks and forklifts. Now, it was still. A shaft of daylight cut through a crack under one of the exterior roll-up doors. That daylight looked unreal after days underground. Omar moved first, checking the bay's corners. "Clear," he whispered. We crossed the bay quickly to the vehicle cage where facility carts and a few maintenance vans were stored. The cage was locked with a heavy padlock. Omar swore under his breath, then looked at me. I pulled my keys out. My contractor key set didn't have that lock, but I knew something. The dock supervisor's office had bolt cutters in a cabinet because deliveries came with broken seals sometimes, and you needed a way to cut them off. Omar nodded and led me to his office. The door was locked. He forced it with the key from his ring. Inside, the office was ransacked, drawers open, papers scattered. Someone had already been here. The bolt cutters were gone. We stood in the office for a heartbeat, the plan crumbling. Then Rick said quietly, "The roll-up door." We looked at the exterior roll-up. It wasn't fully down. It was lowered to about 3 feet from the ground, leaving a gap you could crawl under. That gap was both an exit and a funnel. Anything outside could come in through it. Dorsey made a decision with the kind of calm that comes from having no good choices. "We go out," he said, "one at a time, fast, straight to the alley, no stopping." He looked at me. "Jonah, you first. You know the outside layout." My mouth went dry. I hadn't been outside since the day it began. The zipper had been a kind of denial. Outside meant reality. I nodded anyway. I crouched and slid under the roll-up door, feeling the cold concrete scrape my jacket. For a second I was halfway between worlds, the dim interior behind me and winter daylight in front of me. Then I was out. The alley smelled like the city, damp asphalt, trash, faint exhaust. It also smelled like something else. Stale, sour air that made my nose wrinkle. The street beyond the alley was too quiet for downtown. No traffic, no normal hum. I stood and looked both ways. The alley was empty, but at the far end, near the corner, there was movement. A figure, slow, drifting. Another behind it. They weren't running. They weren't speaking. They were just there. I raised my hand and signaled back, "Hurry!" One by one, the group crawled under. Tanya helped Miles. Omar went last, pulling the door down a little more to reduce the gap, though it wouldn't matter much if something wanted to push in. We moved down the alley in a tight cluster, staying close to walls, avoiding open street. The figures at the corner turned slightly as if they sensed motion. One of them stepped toward us. Dorsey raised a hand not like a weapon but like a barrier, and we shifted into a side passage between buildings, slipping behind dumpsters and a locked gate. The figure drifted to where we'd been, paused, and then turned its head slowly, as if confused by our disappearance. We didn't wait to see what it would do next. We moved deeper into the service network of this city. Alleys, loading docks, maintenance lanes, places meant for deliveries and repairs. Places like the zipper, but outdoors. Every time we had to cross an open section, we did it fast and low. Every time we heard a noise, we froze and listened. We avoided main streets entirely. We aimed toward the riverfront because open water edges tend to be less congested than commercial corridors, and because there were fewer reasons for large groups to gather there in normal life. Miles was slowing. His ankle was swelling again. Tanya was sweating despite the cold. Carla's hands were shaking from holding the lantern too long. We stopped once in a recessed doorway to drink small sips of water and adjust straps. Rick whispered, "How long do we do this?" Dorsey answered without hesitation. "Until we find a stable place," he said, "or until we can't." That honesty, blunt and unadorned, was the only thing keeping panic from spilling out. We reached a point where the alleys opened toward a broader service road that led to the river trail. There were abandoned vehicles angled wrong, doors open, a delivery truck half on the curb. The city looked like it had been interrupted mid-breath. In the distance, a siren wailed once and then cut off, as if the power behind it had died. We crossed the service road one at a time, scanning left and right. No immediate movement. But as we neared the river, the air changed, colder, cleaner, with that damp edge that water brings, and then we saw it, a small cluster of people on the river trail near a maintenance shed. They were standing in a loose circle, not moving much. Some were sitting. They looked exhausted, not aggressive. A shopping cart was overturned nearby, and someone had a bicycle. Dorsey raised a hand and called out softly, "Hey, security, we're not a threat." The cluster startled. A man stood quickly, holding something in his hands, maybe a length of pipe. A woman pulled a child closer. Their faces were pinched with fear. Then one of them, an older man in a knit cap, took a step forward and said, "You're real?" Dorsey nodded. "We're real," he said. "We're trying to get out of the downtown core." The older man looked behind us, then back at Dorsey. "You didn't bring them," he said, voice rough. "No," Dorsey said. "We avoided them." The older man exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "Come here," he said. "We found a maintenance building with a lock. It's not much, but it's something." We approached slowly, showing empty hands. The group watched us like we might transform at any moment. I couldn't blame them. Trust had become dangerous. Inside the maintenance shed, there were shelves with a few supplies. Gloves, cones, a crate of bottled water that someone had probably taken from a nearby kiosk. There was a battery lantern. There was a map of the river trail pinned to the wall. It wasn't a fortress, but it had walls and a door and a sense of boundary. Miles sat on the floor with a groan of relief. Tanya leaned against a wall and closed her eyes. Carla sat beside her, shoulders slumped. Omar pulled in a long breath like he'd forgotten what clean air felt like. Rick looked at me and said quietly, "How did you survive in that building?" I thought of the zipper, the low ceiling, the stale air, the darkness, and the fear, and the moments when a latch turning had almost ended me. I thought of how survival sometimes isn't bravery, it's just finding a gap in the world's attention and staying there. I hid somewhere nobody wanted to be, I said. Somewhere nobody thought to check. Dorsey came over and rested a hand on my shoulder briefly, a rare gesture from a man who usually kept distance. "That place kept you alive," he said. "And because it kept you alive, you brought others here." I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired in my bones. But I felt something else, too. The tight knot in my chest that had been there since day one loosened, just a fraction. Outside, the river moved steadily, indifferent and constant. The city beyond it was quiet, fractured and unfamiliar. But inside the small shed, with people breathing and whispering and sharing water like it mattered, the world shrank to something we could handle for one more day. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if the streets would ever be safe again, or if the lights would come back, or if the emergency alerts would ever stop. I only knew what I'd learned in the narrow maintenance access beneath a public facility. Survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about understanding systems, reading spaces, and choosing the forgotten place when everyone else runs toward the obvious. And if you make it through the first week, you don't get to pretend you're the same person anymore. You become someone who listens before opening doors. Someone who counts water bottles like they're air. Someone who remembers every latch, every corridor, every sound. Someone who knows that the spaces designed to be ignored can save you, as long as you can stand the cost of living inside them. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.